Imagine an unstoppable force sweeping across continents, toppling empires, erasing borders, and rewriting history itself. A force personified by one man whose name would echo through eternity: Genghis Khan. For decades, this Mongol warrior king seemed invincible, his armies so ferocious that even the bravest of adversaries crumbled before them. From China to the Middle East and into Eastern Europe, the shadow of the Mongol Empire spread wider and faster than any civilization before. Yet, at the very peak of his power, when it seemed the entire world might fall under his iron grip, Genghis Khan's seemingly unstoppable advance came to a sudden and mysterious halt. This is the gripping tale of how history's most fearsome conqueror and his Mongol hordes were finally stopped. A saga of unexpected tragedy, internal power struggles, stubborn resistance, and the delicate threads of fate. The story begins in the harsh steppes of Mongolia, where Genghis Khan, born Temujin, united disparate and warring tribes through a brutal combination of cunning, charisma, and relentless ambition. In the early 13th century, Temujin rose from obscurity to become the most feared figure of his era, adopting the title Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. Under his command, the Mongols perfected an innovative warfare strategy based on speed, surprise, and psychological terror. Armed with unmatched horseback riding skills, superior archery, and devastating tactical acumen, Genghis Khan's forces moved swiftly and ruthlessly, conquering cities and annihilating enemies with unprecedented brutality. By 1220, the Mongol Empire was the largest contiguous land empire ever to exist, stretching from the Yellow Sea to the Caspian Sea, and yet, Genghis Khan showed no signs of slowing down. Europe watched in terrified awe as Mongol scouts crossed into what is now Russia, pushing deep into territories previously thought unreachable. It was clear that Genghis Khan was not merely interested in conquest, he sought global dominance. Yet, precisely as Europe braced itself for annihilation, a series of extraordinary events unfolded, altering the fate of the world. In 1227, on the cusp of launching another campaign that could have seen him sweeping further into Europe, Genghis Khan died mysteriously. Historical accounts differ. Some say he fell from his horse during a hunt. Others claim he succumbed to illness, and darker legends whisper about poison or assassination by treachery within his ranks. Regardless of the cause, the sudden passing of the great Khan brought the Mongol advance to an abrupt halt. The empire, though massive, was deeply rooted in loyalty to a single charismatic leader. Without Genghis Khan's unifying presence, a vast power vacuum opened, setting the stage for internal turmoil and division. As per Mongol tradition, upon the death of a Khan, all military operations ceased, and generals hurried back to Mongolia for the selection of a new leader. This pivotal moment gave the rest of the world a much-needed respite. The Mongol forces withdrew from Europe and the Middle East, leaving battlefields empty and survivors bewildered but grateful. However, the story didn't end there. What followed Genghis Khan's death was a bitter and prolonged power struggle among his heirs, particularly among his sons, who battled for dominance of the empire. These internal conflicts splintered the Mongol Empire into multiple khanates, each pursuing independent ambitions rather than continuing the united front of conquest. Yet the world wasn't completely safe from the Mongol threat. Genghis Khan's son Ögedei emerged victorious from this power struggle and became the next great Khan. He quickly sought to resume his father's vision of global domination, launching invasions into Europe once again. This time, the Mongols pushed further westward, ravaging Russia, Poland, Hungary, and even reaching the gates of Vienna. For a terrifying moment, Europe faced complete devastation, but just when victory appeared certain, fate intervened yet again. In 1241, Ögedei Khan unexpectedly died, likely from complications related to alcoholism, a personal vice that had plagued him throughout his life. Once more, Mongol armies halted, abandoning their campaigns to return to Mongolia for yet another succession crisis. This twist of destiny spared Europe from imminent destruction, marking a second time history's greatest conquerors were stopped by the unforeseen hand of death. But the Mongol threat wasn't solely diminished by internal chaos. Resistance from conquered peoples began to take its toll. The once invincible Mongol armies faced staunch opposition from fortified cities, resilient empires, and rugged terrain. Places like the mountainous regions of Afghanistan proved exceedingly difficult for Mongol horsemen to conquer and hold. Even more challenging was the formidable resistance offered by the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. At the Battle of Ain Jalut in 1260, a turning point unfolded that would become one of history's most decisive encounters. The Mamluks, disciplined warriors who had spent generations mastering combat against powerful foes, prepared meticulously to face the seemingly invincible Mongol cavalry. In a stunning display of tactical brilliance, the Mamluks managed to defeat the Mongol army decisively. It was the first significant military defeat in the Mongols' history, shattering the illusion of their invincibility and halting their westward expansion into Africa and southern Europe. Meanwhile, in the Far East, Mongol rule in China, which had been consolidated under Kublai Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, faced unexpected setbacks as well. The Mongol attempt to conquer Japan ended disastrously, twice thwarted by devastating typhoons, famously known as kamikaze, or divine winds. These storms decimated the Mongol fleet, leaving thousands drowned and ambitions crushed. This failure significantly weakened Mongol morale, shaking their belief in their destined supremacy. Similarly, attempts to subdue Southeast Asia encountered fierce resistance from Vietnamese and Burmese kingdoms, where dense jungles and unfamiliar climates eroded Mongol effectiveness. Another significant factor contributing to the cessation of Mongol expansion was the vast logistical complexity of managing an empire stretching thousands of miles. The Mongol method of rapid conquest relied on mobility, surprise, and intimidation rather than establishing stable, lasting governance. As their territories expanded, Mongol generals grappled with overstretched supply lines, dwindling manpower, and increasing rebellion among conquered peoples. Sustaining control across vast distances became increasingly unfeasible. The administrative challenge of holding such a sprawling territory proved equally daunting. Mongol rulers, more accustomed to the saddle and battlefield than governance, often struggled with bureaucracy, corruption, and rebellion within their vast territories. Further complicating matters, the Mongol Empire suffered internal fractures due to religious, cultural, and ethnic tensions within their ranks. Though famously tolerant of diverse beliefs, the Mongols were still fundamentally nomadic warriors who struggled to reconcile the governance needs of sophisticated urban civilizations. In Persia, the Mongol rulers gradually assimilated with local culture, abandoning their original Mongol identity, which eventually weakened central Mongol authority. In China, tensions simmered between the ruling Mongols and the subjugated Chinese population, leading to a weakening grip on power. Ultimately, the Mongol Empire that Genghis Khan had forged through blood, iron, and terror gradually fragmented into smaller khanates, such as the Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Yuan dynasty in China, each gradually losing momentum, power, and territory through internal corruption, external opposition, and rebellions. Over the course of the late 13th and early 14th centuries, these khanates lost coherence, and their once terrifying image gradually diminished, eroded by relentless local resistance, infighting, and logistical nightmares. Today, historians continue to debate how such an unstoppable juggernaut could unravel so dramatically. Was it fate, pure coincidence, internal rivalries, or something more profound, perhaps a lesson about the limits of military conquest and brute force? The unstoppable Mongol Empire serves as a vivid reminder of the fragile nature of power the complexity of empire building, and the unforeseeable consequences of history's turning points. In the end, the Mongol Empire's halt was not brought about by a single adversary or army powerful enough to match Genghis Khan on equal footing. Instead, it was stopped by a complex weave of unforeseen tragedies, ambitious power struggles, natural disasters, stubborn human resistance, and simple logistics. Factors no conqueror, not even the mighty Genghis Khan, could fully anticipate or control. Genghis Khan might have set out to conquer the world, but the vast complexities and unpredictable twists of human history ensured he could not fully master it. Thus, the Great Mongol Expansion, the most extraordinary military conquest the world has ever witnessed, was finally halted, not by a greater conqueror, but by the very unpredictability of life itself, a profound reminder that history's most powerful empires can collapse under their own ambitious weight. Imagine the scenario: a titanic empire built through conquest and terror now splintering, crumbling under the weight of its own ambitions and complexities. As Genghis Khan's heirs struggled to uphold his legacy, the empire he built began fracturing into increasingly independent fragments, each driven by its own distinct ambitions and local realities. The sheer scale of their territories, stretching across deserts, mountains, plains, and rivers, made centralized control increasingly untenable. Communication took weeks, sometimes months, to traverse the vast expanses, causing commands to become outdated even before they reached the furthest edges of the empire. This sprawling, disconnected network of khanates quickly shifted from united power to decentralized feudal states, each more preoccupied with its own survival than the grand vision once dreamed by their legendary ancestor. Moreover, internal strife erupted frequently and violently. Mongol tradition held that the strongest son should inherit leadership, yet these fierce competitions for power weakened central authority and paved the way for rebellion. Blood feuds tore through families as brothers, cousins, and nephews clashed violently, each convinced of his divine right to rule. The political unity that once allowed them to conquer half the known world was torn apart by intrigue, betrayal, and endless internal warfare. The very tactics and traits that had brought them success, ambition, ruthlessness, and cunning, now tore the empire apart from within. Additionally, the Mongols faced growing resistance from cultures and societies they once subdued. Rebellions sparked frequently, often inspired by the oppressive taxes levied to support the lavish lifestyles of distant Khans. The sheer brutality of Mongol rule had created deep-seated resentment among conquered peoples, and as the empire weakened, these oppressed populations seized opportunities for revolt. In Persia, a combination of heavy taxation, religious differences, and ethnic tensions led to a widespread rebellion that gradually eroded Mongol power. Meanwhile, in China, resentment simmered as Mongol rulers insisted on maintaining their distinct nomadic identity, refusing to fully integrate with Chinese society. Eventually, this resentment exploded into rebellion, weakening and fragmenting Mongol rule even further. The Mongol war machine itself also began to falter as its once invincible tactics lost their edge against increasingly adaptable adversaries. European kingdoms and Middle Eastern states learned from earlier devastating defeats, building stronger fortifications, organizing disciplined infantry formations, and adopting advanced military tactics capable of countering Mongol cavalry charges. Armies like the Mamluks of Egypt and the Hungarians in Eastern Europe developed sophisticated defensive strategies, often leveraging terrain advantages to neutralize the Mongols' superior cavalry and archery skills. Each Mongol defeat emboldened other kingdoms to stand and fight, turning the Mongols' aura of invincibility into vulnerability. Simultaneously, Mongol reliance on rapid cavalry warfare was severely tested by unfamiliar environments. Dense jungles in Southeast Asia, vast deserts in the Middle East, and mountainous terrain in Afghanistan presented formidable challenges for the nomadic armies, accustomed as they were to open steppes. Disease, starvation, and exhaustion ravaged Mongol troops, diminishing their fighting strength and morale. Campaigns that once seemed unstoppable ground to a halt, bogged down by logistical nightmares and ferocious local resistance. Economic realities further hastened their decline. The vast costs of maintaining armies, administering territories, and feeding lavish courts drained Mongol coffers. While trade flourished briefly along routes like the famed Silk Road under Mongol protection, continuous warfare eventually disrupted these vital commerce channels. Economic hardships grew, further exacerbating rebellions among disgruntled populations, burdened by heavy taxation and frequent conscriptions. Additionally, ecological factors subtly undermined the empire's strength. Overgrazing by Mongol livestock devastated pasture lands, triggering environmental degradation that weakened agricultural productivity across vast swathes of the empire. Food shortages and famines became increasingly common, compounding the Mongols' difficulties in sustaining large armies and stable governance. Nature itself seemed to conspire against the Mongols, their dominance gradually unraveling under ecological pressures they neither anticipated nor understood. Even cultural assimilation played a paradoxical role. While many Mongol leaders, especially in Persia and Central Asia, adopted local customs and converted to Islam or Buddhism, this blending of cultures diluted their original identity and gradually undermined the fierce unity and warrior ethos that defined their earlier successes. The further these rulers drifted from their Mongol roots, the weaker their ties to a unified Mongol empire became. Assimilation ultimately fragmented the empire from within, as khans and generals became more loyal to their new identities than to their Mongol heritage. Ultimately, it was not a single defeat or adversary that halted the Mongols, but a cascading series of interrelated setbacks and internal contradictions. The Mongol Empire's dramatic collapse illustrates an enduring historical lesson. Empires built solely on military prowess and fear cannot sustain indefinitely. Conquest alone does not guarantee longevity. Rather, empires endure only through stable governance, cultural cohesion, and sustainable economic management. Genghis Khan's unstoppable empire, therefore, was not defeated by superior military might, but collapsed beneath the immense weight of its own ambitions, internal contradictions, environmental pressures, and human resistance, an unforgettable reminder of power's inevitable vulnerability.